Hello everyone and welcome to the weird, scary and horrible parts of humanity. Today we are heading back to the so-called Disneyland with the death penalty, Singapore, to analyse the execution of Singaporean Malay citizen Nazeri bin Lajim, who was arrested for drug trafficking heroin from Malaysia to neighbouring Singapore and orchestrating the drug run. Nazeri bin Lajim was born in 1958 in Singapore and had 10 other siblings, his family identified as Muslim. His father was of British descent and worked as an administrator in the colonial British Army, and was initially from London in the United Kingdom. Nazeri's mother was of Malay descent. According to his sister Nazeri Lajim, he looked like his father as he was tall and had many of his father's personality traits as he was soft-spoken. The family was initially well off and lived a luxurious life compared to many Singaporeans with a television and car. However, on the 16th of September 1963, Singapore became a state of Malaysia and ended 144 years of British colonialisation and rule on Singapore, before on the 9th of August 1965, Singapore declared her independence from Malaysia. This presented a problem for British troops, and on the 18th of July 1967, the United Kingdom announced that she would remove the last of her troops by the mid-1970s, which was brought forward in January 1968 to 1971, presenting problems to Singapore's defence and economic security. However, Nazeri's father would truly suffer, as the good income and fairly affluent life that the family had enjoyed on his salary as an administrator in the colonial British Army was suddenly dissipated, with Nazeri aged 13 at the time of British troops withdrawing from Singapore. His father briefly worked for the New Zealand Army, who maintained a small presence in Singapore as part of the New Zealand Force Southeast Asia, which comprised elements of the Royal New Zealand Navy, the New Zealand Army and the Royal New Zealand Air Force. However, this job quickly fell through. His father initially planned to relocate to London in the United Kingdom with his 11 children and wife to continue his tenure in the British Army. However, his wife refused, as she only spoke Malay and had difficulty communicating in English, and as a result she refused to move to London, with the family remaining in Singapore. With Nazeri's father unable to find a job in Singapore, this put a significant financial strain on the family. His mother began taking on multiple jobs to support the large family. This resulted in the children fending for themselves, both financially and taking on multiple jobs, as well as striving for emotional support, with many venturing to live in neighbouring Malaysia once they had finished their schooling. Nazeri would note that they were treated like strays and that they became disintegrated as a family. Nazeri felt neglected by his mother, with a lack of parental care and attention, with his eldest brother allegedly physically abusing him. He only obtained a primary school education and by 14 was addicted to drugs and using quaaludes. He also went rogue as a child and didn't spend a lot of time at home. His father ended up suffering a stroke and dying at the age of 45 when Nazeri was aged 18. Nazeri's drug addiction never subsided, and he ended up spending nearly 3/4 of his life in Singaporean jails or drug rehabilitation centres, which were forced as part of court orders. However, he reportedly did not receive a lot of rehabilitation while in prison. As he grew older, he became increasingly introverted and didn't talk much about his feelings. His sister Nazeri noted that he was an individual who could not take criticism or rejection or hardship. Once living with her after his release from prison, as he had started using again, when she threatened to kick him out, he picked up a knife and threatened to end his life, stating, "Naz, society looks down on me. I'm the worst person in society." In 1998, Nazeri married a woman in Singapore named Sheila, who was pictured on the right with the pair pictured on their wedding day. Sheila had a daughter from a previous relationship, and in 1998 his wife gave birth to a son named Haikal. However, his wife became sick of his drug addiction and frequent imprisonment, leading Sheila to divorce him. The three would maintain a close relationship and bond with Nazeri up until his execution, with Sheila telling Vice News Asia that she still loved him. The duo would visit him while he was on death row at least twice a month. At 5:05 a.m. on the 13th of April 2012, Nazeri, who at the time was aged 54, was arrested at the junction of Anguilla Park and Orchard Road, the primary shopping area of Singapore, for smuggling heroin into Singapore. Just prior to this, 24-year-old Malaysian accomplice Dominic Martin Fernandez had ridden a motorcycle and met Nazeri, who had alighted from a taxi. However, both were under surveillance by Singapore's Central Narcotics Bureau. Fernandez had trafficked for drugs from neighbouring Malaysia into Singapore. When Fernandez was arrested by officers of the Central Narcotics Bureau, it was found that he had a brown envelope containing 10,400 Singaporean dollars in cash, about $7,500 US. Central Narcotics Bureau officers had seen the money exchanged to Fernandez by Nazeri in exchange for the drugs. Inside Nazeri's sling bag were two black-taped bundles containing about 960 grams of heroin, estimated to have a street value of 144,000 Singaporean dollars, about 103,500 US dollars. Moreover, a straw of heroin and a small flip knife was discovered in the bag. When the drugs were weighed, it was found that 33.89 grams of the heroin was diamorphine, or pure heroin, which is enough for 400 addicts for a week. In Singapore, the minimum threshold is 15 grams, and anything above that at the time of Nazeri's arrest carried a mandatory death sentence. Charged with smuggling heroin into Singapore and believed to have been the orchestrator of the operation by the Central Narcotics Bureau, with Fernandez merely a courier, a pawn if you will. Nazeri's trial commenced on the 11th of August 2015 at the High Court of Singapore, and he was represented by Singaporean lawyer James Masih. Nazeri always denied knowing that he had heroin in his possession, admitting that he ordered the drugs from a man named Kumar based in Malaysia, who had asked Fernandez to deliver the drugs to him in Singapore. Nazeri stated that he had planned to sell 13.318 grams of the diamorphine, which if true would have taken him off the death penalty, as it was below the 15-gram threshold, and the rest was intended for his own personal consumption. With Nazeri still a fully fledged drug addict at this stage, he aimed to use the money that he would make through selling the heroin to fulfill his drug addiction. He had argued that Fernandez had delivered more heroin and diamorphine than intended, and that he had only meant to receive one bundle. However, his defence was rejected by the High Court when it was found that it was more likely that he intended to sell the drugs rather than keep them for himself as a fully fledged heroin addict, with the testimony that he was going to sell only 13.318 grams of the heroin deemed both unreliable and untruthful, which made Nazeri eligible for the death penalty. By contrast, Fernandez was deemed by the High Court to have acted merely as a drug courier, and additionally had cooperated with the Central Narcotics Bureau in disrupting other drug trafficking activities. However, Nazeri did not satisfy the requirements of a drug courier under Singaporean law, and was not assessed to have any mental illness. As a result, on the 8th of August 2017, Senior Judge Kan Ting Cho sentenced Nazeri to death. On the same day, Fernandez was sentenced to life in prison with 15 strokes of the cane. He remains in Changi Prison serving his life sentence. Held on death row at Changi Prison, Nazeri remained positive while on death row. An appeal to the Singaporean Court of Appeal was rejected on the 4th of July 2018, with a further clemency petition launched in July 2019. However, along with 12 other prisoners who were facing the death penalty, his first clemency petition was rejected on the 10th of July 2019. Over the next 3 years, Nazeri would launch a plethora of lawsuits in a desperate attempt to save himself from the gallows. In March 2021, he engaged with human rights lawyer M. Ravi, and Nazeri reused his defence that he had only meant to keep most of the drugs for his own usage, and added that he had meant to return the second bundle of heroin to Fernandez when he discovered that the amount of diamorphine was above 13.318 grams. Moreover, Masih admitted that he had overlooked certain matters that would have aided Nazeri's defence in his original trial. However, on the 20th of April 2021, Judge Tay Yong Kwang rejected this appeal, as despite the evident shortcomings of Masih's representation, his claims that he had only intended to keep the 13.318 grams of diamorphine, with the majority to be used by himself as a heroin addict, did not have any credibility, and simultaneously the concept that he intended to return the additional heroin to Fernandez was inconsistent with his original case. A lawsuit was then brought up by Nazeri and 21 other death row prisoners of Changi Prison against the Attorney General of Singapore, with allegations that the private letters between the death row inmates and their lawyers and families were being forwarded to the Attorney General's chambers by the prison authorities, leading the death row inmates to allege that the Attorney General's chambers had conducted a breach of conduct to protect the inmates' rights, had facilitated misconduct in public office, and sought damages for the harm caused. Now, the findings of this case were bizarre and strange at best, and at worst utterly corrupt, because the Attorney General's chambers never denied reading private letters and correspondence between death row inmates in Changi Prison, and did not deny that prison authorities had forwarded the correspondence to them. The High Court Judge Si Ki Ong dismissed the lawsuit on the 16th of March 2021, ruling that it may be allowed for prisons, including Changi Prison, to make copies of the inmates' correspondence for screening and recording letters, but prisons were not allowed to forward them to the Attorney General's chambers unless the prisoner consented. So why was the lawsuit dismissed if what they did was technically, in layman's terms, not allowed? Well, High Court Judge Si Ki Un argued that the reading of such such private correspondence by the Attorney General's chambers was an act of negligence rather than an intention to take advantage over court proceedings, in essence judging the lawsuit of the 22 prisoners to be frivolous. In August 2021, 17 death row inmates, including Nazeri, all of whom were of Malay descent, launched an appeal on the basis that their death sentences were as a result of alleged racist discrimination due to their Malay background. The lawsuit was historic in Singapore and made significant news in Malaysia, and alleged that Malays in Singapore were less likely to have their death sentences quashed or commuted to a jail term upon appeal. Indeed, it was revealed that between 2010 and 2021, Malays made up 66 of 120 prosecutions for drug trafficking in Singapore, with over 76% of them sentenced to death, with 50 out of the 77 people sentenced to death between 2010 and 2021 in Singapore to be Malays. This is despite Malays making up 13.5% of Singapore's population as of June 2020. Represented by M. Ravi and Cheng Kum Kwan, it was argued that this equated to discrimination and an over-representation of minorities. The appeal was dismissed on the 2nd of December 2021, with no evidence that inmates were treated differently based on their race, and such allegations would put the integrity of Singaporean law at stake, with the entire lawsuit judged to be a farce, frivolous and groundless, and an abuse of the judicial and court process in mounting such accusations against the Singaporean courts. M. Ravi and Cheng Kim Kwan were both fined 10,000 Singaporean dollars in costs for the lawsuit, about $7,188 US. While her brother was on death row, Nazeri's sister, Nazira, had become a strong appealer against the death penalty, and in May 2022 the family filed a second plea for clemency, which was denied. On the 15th of July 2022, the family received his death warrant, with his execution to take place on the 22nd of July 2022. His family rushed from Malaysia to travel to Singapore to see Nazeri on death row for one last time. Notification of his impending hanging came 8 days after the executions of Singaporean citizens Norashare Gus and Malaysian citizen Kalwani Singh Joginder Singh, who we will be exploring in a future video. On the 18th of July 2022, Nazeri's family gathered over 400 signatures on the family and loved ones of death row inmates, calling for Singapore to abolish capital punishment, with hopes that the appeal could be presented to the Singaporean Parliament, but this did not come to fruition. Moreover, his now 24-year-old son Haikal and his ex-wife Sheila, as well as members of Nazeri's family, were interviewed calling for his life to be spared. On the 19th of July 2022, 3 days before he was scheduled to hang, Nazeri filed another appeal to seek a stay of execution with the High Court of Singapore. This was dismissed on the 20th of July 2022. On the same day, his siblings visited him and he reminisced a lot on his childhood memories and asked for his sister Nazira to take care of his son. In an interview with Vice News Asia, Nazira would state, "This is the lowest, saddest moment in my life. My legs are weak. I've been crying the whole night. I've been praying and praying. I'd rather my brother die of a heart attack than hanging. I just can't accept that my brother has to be hanged. Suddenly his life will be taken away. Just like that." She also stated that her brother is sick. He's not a violent person. How can you hang a sick person? She would also tell her brother that he was going to a better place and that life here was so painful for him. However, Nazeri and his appeals weren't done just yet. On the 21st of July 2022, he launched a final appeal to the Court of Appeal and represented himself over Zoom. He requested a deferment of between 1 to 2 weeks to allow himself to engage in legal representation, sought a court order that his capital charge was arbitrarily imposed, which violated his constitutional rights, sought a stay of execution pending court proceedings, argued that the prosecution was unconstitutional and citing several cases of other offenders, initially charged with importing drugs above the capital threshold, but later convicted of non-capital crimes, and he argued that he needed a bit more time so that relatives and family could visit him one last time. The three judges of appeal, Andrew Pang, Tai Yong Kwang and Belinda Ung, rejected Nazeri's final appeal, arguing that his application was entirely devoid of factual basis, with the appeal dismissed as an abuse of the court's process, as Nazeri had failed to establish how his constitutional rights had been breached as a Singaporean citizen. Ultimately, this did not warrant the need to adjourn the hearing for Nazeri to find legal representation, as throughout the appeal, due to the last-minute dash, he had represented himself over Zoom. Senior State Counsel Anandan Balal stated that the present application is patently unmeritorious. It is ultimately a thinly concealed attempt to stave off the lawful execution of a sentence of death imposed on the applicant. Pang summed it up strongest by stating, "There must come a point in time that the applicant accepts the consequences of his actions." On the same day, Rabi tried to postpone the execution of Nazeri by calling him as a witness in a disciplinary probe against him, but this was denied, sealing his fate and his execution. The Central Narcotics Bureau made a press release on the 21st of July 2022, arguing that there was no miscarriage of justice in Nazeri's case, with his case conducted in full accordance to Singaporean law, with Singapore only deploying capital punishment for the most serious crimes, including drug trafficking, with the Central Narcotics Bureau arguing that the death penalty was an effective and relevant measure to tackle drug problems in Singapore. The next day, the 22nd of July 2022, Nazeri's family visited him for one last time and took photos of a happy Nazeri who insisted that they should be happy and spend the precious time together rather than being sad and depressed. He was hanged at dawn at Changi Prison after nearly 10 years on death row. His family reclaimed the remains from Changi Prison, with funeral prayers held at Masjid Asaikreen in Taman Jurong, Singapore. His remains were buried at the Muslim cemetery in Masjid Al-Firdaus, a mosque in Chao Chu Kang, Singapore. Despite public support for the execution of Nazeri within Singapore, the execution was met with some criticism from human rights activist Kristen Hahn, the European Union, the United Nations, and INGO Amnesty International, who noted that Singapore's continual execution of drug traffickers was representative of the utter disregard the Singaporean authorities have for human rights and the right to life. Thank you for watching. Please do yourself a favour and hit that subscribe button and the bell icon to inform yourself of when new videos come out. Also, why not hit that like button and leave a nice comment? It helps more than you know and your support is truly appreciated. Until next time, stay awesome, stay classy, be kind to everyone you meet, have an amazing day, and remember the truth is always more interesting than fiction.